Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my spirit animal and co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you?
I'm flabbergasted.
Over what?
The fact that we landed Bruce Broughton for a podcast.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. Yeah, isn't that kind of crazy?
I don't understand how we did it.
I don't either, but we did. Yeah. So is it Broughton or is it Broughton?
Yes, it definitely is.
So yeah, we got Bruce. We'll call him Bruce. So maybe people will think it's Springsteen because he's appeared. Bruce Springsteen has appeared on every Brass podcast except for ours.
Mm-hmm.
We got Bruce Broughton, who is he's really only known for writing his tuba concerto. So not at all true. He's like a super famous movie composer who has won. You'll hear all about it, but he's won all kinds of awards and did the score for Silverado. And it's crazy that we spoke to an actual famous person who was not friends with us beforehand.
Yeah, very weird,
right? We've talked to plenty of famous people on this podcast, but it's kind of like when I texted Joe Alessi, I think he was like, it's going to be easier to just say yes rather than like, he just didn't really want to deal with it. So he said, sure, man. No, I'm just kidding. He was happy to do it. But the point is that we got a famous person we didn't know first. That's pretty cool, man. I think this is what we've arrived, man.
I completely agree.
This will be the final episode of the Brass Junkies. I think it's been I would say it's been a great run, but it's been, I guess, kind of fine run here. So so let's this interview's awesome. You're going to love it. Lance, why don't you tell the people how they can help us to get more famous people on the show?
Hey, one of the ways you can help us get more famous people on the show is to become famous and then come on our show. Another way that you can help is to help offset the costs of producing the show. And the easiest way to do that is to go to Patreon, Patreon.com, and go to the Brass Junkies page and subscribe. And what you would do is you would say, hey, I love this show so much. I want to help these guys out. I'm going to contribute $1 per episode, so that'd be $26 a year, or $2 an episode, or $10 an episode, whichever fits your budget. You can cap it per month, you can cap it per year, and you can sort of start or stop anytime you want. We're going to start rolling out Patreon-specific content here in October of 2016, where
That will have already happened, Lance.
That will have already happened.
It's November, obviously. No, this is Bruce.
Merry Christmas.
I'm so confused.
I don't know what's happening. It's his Secretary's Day today.
Mutter. We're in the middle. It's October 11th today, Lance.
Is it? Oh, goodness. Happy October to you. So anyway, we are very appreciative of the patrons who have already contributed and continue to contribute via Patreon. And if you are looking for a way to help support this show, that is a very easy yet helpful way to do so. So please consider making a donation at patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Hey, man, that was good. That was pretty tight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that was almost like we've done this before.
That was not so bad. We would also like to thank Parker Mouthpieces for providing our hosting. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Okay, here's the funny part, is that the part of that I just had trouble reading is my own freaking name. All right. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz artist model tuba mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke model euphonium mouthpiece.
Ooh.
Find out. You know what, that feeling that you can't put your finger on right now? That's excitement. Find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My brain was like,
Parker Mouthpieces, he will help you blow. No,
This is not the
isn't that
real
the official
jingle.
jingle?
But he's going to sing it every single time now because I laughed the first time.
How about
For the
how do
record,
you get really good buzz? Parker mouthpieces. Yeah. How about that one?
.com. So these are the official jingles of Parker Mouthpieces. Actually, we ran all of these by Michael first. So he's either going to be very amused or horrified or both. So anyway, that does it. This is an awesome conversation that we had with Bruce Broughton. And for those of you who don't know his Tuba Concerto, if you're a tuba player, play it because it's a really great piece of music. And if you know me, I don't say that about a ton of tuba rep. So that's a legit. That's not a good piece for a tuba solo. It's a good piece, and that's the end of the compliment. So, without further ado, here is the conversation that Lance and I had with our new friend who happens to be famous, Bruce Broughton. And today we are absolutely delighted to be, as Lance described our guest today, he said, this guy is like a real guest. This is what he said. This is not just one of our knucklehead brass playing friends. This is an internationally renowned film composer and classical composer, and he's written music for video games and TV shows. And is the composer of one of my favorite tuba solos ever written. And this is Bruce Broughton. How are you doing today, Bruce?
Great, particularly after that introduction.
We're nice to all the guests initially, so yeah, we find it goes better when we butter you up a little bit. Bruce, I was just joking with him before we started that I could take half of the podcast to read the highlights of his bio, but he has written the film scores to movies like Silverado and Tombstone and Miracle on 34th Street. Harry and the Hendersons. He's written television themes, including Jag and Steven Spielberg's Tiny Toon Adventures. He's been nominated for 24 Emmys and won a record 10 of them. He's been Oscar nominated and Grammy nominated. He's had compositions performed by the Cleveland Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony, the National Symphony. It's a long list. So why don't? And also he teaches at USC and at UCLA. So other than that, he's not too busy. So why don't you tell us, Bruce? How did you get started in music?
Well, my family was musical. In fact, they were all brass players. I had a grandfather who was a composer, did a lot of brass band music. He played trumpet. I had an uncle who was a trumpet player until his teeth disappeared after a hockey puck hit him. Oh. Another grandfather played tuba. Both my parents played brass instruments. My brother was a professional trombone player and composer. And I played mediocre horn when I was a kid. So that's my brass background.
First, second, third, mediocre, right?
Yeah. I really wasn't very good. My main instrument is piano, but at least I know the fingerings. And my range was pretty pathetic, but I'm sympathetic to horn players.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of. I mean, I became a huge fan of your. Right when I graduated from high school, Silverado came out, and I knew I was going to study music at Michigan State. I knew I was going to be in the marching band. I was into brass music. I just thought that movie was awesome too. I just was into movies, and so your name stuck in my head because it's a cool name as well. And it is clear that you have had that sort of brass influence. Was there a connection with the Salvation Army tradition as well?
Yeah, I mean that's why we were all brass people.
Oh, okay.
My family, going back to my great-grandmother, went for a long time. Was part of the Salvation Army, and my grandfather, the composer, was a Salvation Army composer.
I see.
And he was pretty well known in that group, doing brass band pieces. So I got my first instruction in theory at Salvation Army band camps when I was about 6, 7 years old, which was actually annoying once I got, because I remember my first semester at college, I had to take elementary theory, and I said, I learned this stuff when I was like 8 years old. And I said, I've taught it to 8-year-olds. And they said, well, do they understand it? And I said, yeah, I did. I mean, for years and years and years, I had a basic understanding of basic music. At the same time, however, I was taking piano, and piano was the one that stuck. Everybody has their own instrument, and sometimes people start on the clarinet and they end up on the violin, or they start up on the trumpet and end up on the trombone, something like that. So I ended up on the piano.
It seems to me that people don't have an appreciation, especially brass players. I don't think a lot of brass players are aware of the influence, or the impact, I should say, that the Salvation Army music program has had on brass ensembles or brass banding in the U.S. especially.
Well, they do in the UK.
In the UK, they do, yeah.
That's where the brass band tradition really began. It's interesting that several guys have come out of the Army, like Phil Smith is probably the most famous in Philharmonic. Phil Cobb over at the LSO, he comes from a Salvation Army family. I remember seeing his grandfather play when I was a kid, and was talking to him about it a couple of months ago. Yeah, there are really a lot of fine players that come out. Unfortunately, the Army's known not even for what they primarily do. I mean, they're basically an evangelical religious organization with a huge social program, but their method of attracting people was initially through brass bands on the street, because they're noisy, and they make a lot of racket. And then they became progressively better. And some of them are really, 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 really good. Some of them really are really not good. I mean, I'll tell you what's interesting about that is that several years ago, they recognized this, and they realized that they couldn't always get a full complement of brass players in order to get a regulation type brass band. So they started putting out music for smaller ensembles. And finally, I don't know if you know the name Eric Leidson. Eric Leidson was a really well-known band arranger, but he was also a Salvation Army guy. And he devised a system by which a whole bunch of music could be played with just 4 parts. So if you have a part in B flat or an E flat, which are the 2 primary keys in brass band music, you could play the first part, the second part, the third, or the fourth part, and it didn't matter whether you had 1 player or whether you had 10 players. It would still sound complete as long as you had the 4 players. So they accommodated these small bands as well as they possibly could, including having a lot of graded music. I guess it's a pretty arcane group, but if you went to a Salvation Army service and they had a band, you would probably find that the band was much better than their choir. The choirs tend to be kind of rudimentary, but the band is where they put all their attention. At least, I mean, I haven't been around the Army for a long time, but that's what I remember growing up.
I remember I played for, I guess I played for 7 years or so with River City Brass Band and then the Brass Band of Battle Creek as well. And we played a number of tunes. How many brass band tunes have you written?
Oh, I've got a fair amount of them. River City recorded Harlequin.
That's right.
It's an early one. I've got, gosh, I don't know. I mean, if you include the stuff I did when I was younger for the Salvation Army, I probably have a couple of dozen pieces for brass band. And these things, remarkably, they still get played. I still hear stuff that I did when I was like 20 years old, which is a long time ago. And I don't mind hearing it because, for the most part, I think the music's okay. I mean, there are a few pieces I'd be happy not to hear again. But, once you become well-known, they start digging out all your old music, and you just sort of have to live with it.
Sure. Do you find, I mean, the common thing that I hear is that if you write for bands or brass bands, you end up getting way more performances than if you write for orchestra. Although I should say that the repertoire gets played much more often.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, several guys like Michael Dougherty, John Quiliano, these guys have started writing for band. The advantage is the commissions can be pretty good because if they get together a consortium, you can, if you're at a high end like, Quiliano or something like that, you can do pretty well financially. But the most important thing for a composer is that it's not going to be a one-off. They're not going to do what an orchestra does, is have 3 or 4 hours of limited rehearsal and spend all their time playing the Mozart, because that's what everybody knows.
Right.
The band is actually going to spend a lot of time playing your piece. And by the time they get to the performance, it's going to be good. And then they're going to ask for something else. Because bands like new music. Bands don't play a lot of stuff from 300 years ago, like the orchestras do. Now, I'm not dissing the music from 300 years ago. I mean, I like Bach and all those guys too. But one of the problems, I think, with contemporary music is that in the orchestral world, new composers really don't get enough opportunity to be heard. So if they don't get a chance to be heard, they don't get enough chance to actually hear their own music, and they don't get a chance to be able to correct their mistakes. Whereas in a band, even though there's an awful lot of pretty awful band music, there's some band music that's really interesting and really good, and there's a lot of it, because as soon as the composer finishes something, if you like what he did, you'll commission another one.
That's right.
And then you'll spend 2 or 3 months playing it for a fancy concert, so by the time you get the performance, it's really good. So I think a lot of composers are going to bands. I like orchestral stuff too. I can do both of them because of my movie background. I became a good orchestrator, but I've never lost my affection for bands. I like brass bands. I like symphonic bands. I've got 2 commissions right now, one for the Air Force for their band. I like that. I like the fact that, for instance, the Air Force band goes out and plays for people.
Sure.
It's the face of, it's sort of the benign face of the United States. And so it goes out and plays to people. So you have to write a piece that people will take in and appreciate, that's interesting enough for the band to be enthusiastic about it, but the people can get worked up about it. What's the downside? I don't see it.
Yeah, with you.
You may not get your name in a fancy music journal, or you may get really crummy reviews. Like I get crummy reviews all the time, mostly because of my film background. Because nobody can think of film music as being serious music. Well, try to write one of those scores. You'll see how funny that is. But so reviews aside, in terms of how the audiences respond to music, and in terms of the kind of work that a lot of bands do, and also in terms of just the sheer fun of playing in a band. That's probably why you're in the River City Band.
Sure.
Because it's fun. It's just really fun. It's like a great club. That's how the brass band movement started. It's a bunch of miners, on their lunchtime, going out and staying warm and having a good time.
Yeah. So, well, and I was in the Air Force Band actually for 7 years before that. So that's a perfect example, because your tune is going to get played dozens of times by that group. If they take it on one tour, they're going to play it 24 times.
Yeah, and they'll record it.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So I don't see any downside. And then once they have their run, you can give it to other people. I've had a couple of people. Like I have a trumpet solo called Excursions, which has gotten played a lot. Well, that was an Air Force piece. So they had it for a year or whatever, and then it's gone off, and it's done reasonably good business among trumpet players. I know a lot of guys who have played it. So I don't see any downside in it at all, as long as you're not stuffy. If you want to write really off the wall contemporary music with really weird sounds and new ideas, you can do that in a band. I have friends who do that. A friend of mine, Alex Shapiro, who's a fairly successful composer, has written a piece that includes shredding paper. Kids love it. They think it's a lot of fun. It's not my kind of music, but she does very well off of it, and she gets performances. So you can do that in a band too.
Were you going to ask a question, Andy?
I was going to go and I was going to take us way back, but so.
Oh, go ahead. No, it's okay.
I'm just wondering how did it come about that you wrote your very first composition? Obviously, you were surrounded by music, so it wasn't, I guess nothing was completely out of left field, but how did you come to compose your very first piece of music, and do you remember what it was?
Yeah, I do remember what it was, because my grandfather kept a copy of it. I think I was probably about 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
I hadn't really started music lessons yet, but I knew what a staff was. I'm not sure I had the number of lines correct. I've got the piece around somewhere. And I knew that the notes were round-shaped with stems and that kind of stuff. So I wrote this out, and the name of the piece, it was a Christmas hymn. I guess I wrote it around Christmas, called "Go Up, Jesus, Come Down, Baby." So that was my first piece. And
that's awesome.
When I got to be around 12, I think I started writing music around 12. 12, I think, was the time that I was able to actually get a tune begin and end in the same key. So I'd have to say that was probably my first success as a composer. And I started doing brass band transcriptions at that time, and started seriously writing, whatever serious means, when I was about 14. But my first piece was that little Christmas hymn, "Go Up, Jesus, Come Down, Baby."
What? I was expecting a pretty good answer, but that was better. That exceeded my expectations.
It's probably a little suspect, but
What age were you when you first thought about that you might want to compose for a career?
I was a lot older. To tell you the truth, I never wanted to be a composer. It was not one of the things I grew up wanting to be. I wanted to be an animator. So my hero was Walt Disney. Now, at the same time, I'm taking, like everything else in my life has always been a secret to me. So, I just sort of see what's ready for me today to see what my mind's up to. I continued with my music studies, and when it was time to go to college, I really didn't know what my major should be because I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do. So for a while I took English, and then I thought, I'll take music because I know music, and if I stay in music, by the time I'm out of college, I'd have a good idea of, what I might want to do. So I decided to take composition because that was the one I knew the least. I was a good pianist. I didn't want to become a music teacher. I didn't want to continue for advanced degrees. I just wanted to get my degree and get out. So I became a composer. And one day I was driving, I must have been about 20 or 21 years old. I was driving down La Brea Boulevard in Los Angeles listening to the radio. And being young, I was listening to a song, and the song was getting me all worked up. And I was getting excited by the song. And I thought, that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to write music that make people feel. Because this song was making me feel really good. And I thought, I'd like to do that. And this all happened within a couple of seconds. I thought, so what kind of music should I get into? Should I be a songwriter? And I thought, no, that's too short. It's like 2.5 minutes. I don't want to do that. I like to write music of a longer variety. What kind of movies? If I got into movies hit a lot of people because I want to hit as many people as possible. They sit in a darkened room. They sort of focus on what is going on, and there's an emotional contingent to it. So I'm going to see if I can get into the movies. And that was my conversion to being a composer. I was really fortunate that right out of college, I got a job with CBS Television in the music department, a job that doesn't exist. The music department doesn't exist anymore. But I spent 10 years there really learning the nuts and bolts of film music, as well as a lot about the film music business, because I ended up being the manager of the department, a job which I really loathed and was not particularly cut out for. So it was a good reason to leave CBS and go freelance. But by that time, I'd already written some episodes of Hawaii Five-0 and things like that. So I did very well. As soon as I went freelance, I started doing well.
Do you remember what the song was on the radio?
No, but it could have been. Well, no, it wouldn't have been Elton John. It was before Elton John. But it was during that period when music was really good. It was the late 60s. It was probably around 67, 66. You guys remember those years, right?
Absolutely.
I've listened to a lot of music from those years, but not in a car at the time.
No, when I know I've become really old is when I stand in front of a class and say, okay, so when I began, and then as soon as I do that, I go, oh, don't even go there. Because when I began, we used to work on film. Film was celluloid. It had sprocket holes. Videotape wasn't invented yet. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have computers. None of this stuff was even on the screens of anybody. It was certainly not iPhones. All this stuff that we use now to make music just wasn't there. So when I began, it's like, yeah, the dinosaurs were eating mammals.
Wow, you're older than I thought. There you go, dinosaurs eating mammals.
Well, so how did you navigate the waters from then to now? In terms, it was a very different, as you just said, it was on film, and the writing process was probably quite different. And of course, now everything's done electronically. So I'm sure a lot of your contemporaries didn't make the switch. And so how is it that you were able to continue to evolve and morph and thrive and become the mega success you are now?
Well, terror helps. You've got to keep learning things. Look, I think of synthesizers as being another food group in music. It's sort of like you have woodwinds, brass, strings, percussion, and synthesizers. Now, I'm not as knowledgeable in all the electronic stuff as a guy 20 or 30 years younger than I am. But, I know how to get around it. And I think most of the composers know how to get around it. The only guy I think who really does not deal with it is John Williams. And John Williams is 105 years old. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to learn about that. He writes just fine on his pencil, and also pencil's not dead. A lot of us still write with pencil. I do a lot of my work with pencil. Sometimes I do it strictly on software. Sometimes I play it in. I mean, I do whatever I do to get the job out. But you just learn things. You have to keep learning things. And if I hadn't learned how to deal with a computer, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, you've got to learn how to do this stuff. Now, I'm not as fast at it as my kids are. They're really fast at it, and they tell me new things all the time. They tell me new apps that I can use. But I like finding the new apps. I like trying to figure out how things work. So if someone tells me about new software, I'll pay attention. I'll look at it, and I might incorporate it. The thing is, though, it doesn't take the place of a really good idea. And there are some traps in it for thinking that it takes the place of the original material. For instance, I tell my students, if you want to become a really great orchestrator, you'll never learn it on a sampler, because samplers are not cut out for that. If you put a brass band piece into a sampler, it sounds like crap. If you put a brass band piece into a brass band, it may still sound like crap until they learn it. But once they learn it, it's going to sound good. It's going to sound really good. Or you're going to be able to hear your mistakes, and then you're going to be able to correct them. But on a sampler, the samplers aren't built for that. There's a lot of downside for it. So, and a really great music program is not a substitute for a really great idea. I think one of the issues that I have with contemporary music, and particularly with pop music, is that a lot of the stuff is keyboard oriented or electronics driven. So you end up with the sound design, but you don't end up with musical ideas that are really interesting. Like I was telling my wife yesterday, she does the movies. She's a concertmaster in the movies. I was listening to a composer, a guy who I think is a really good composer, symphonic guy. I think he's very musical. I think he's very skillful, all that kind of stuff. And I don't care to hear his music more than once. Wow. Because it just is not emotionally grabbing. But do I think he's great? Yeah, I think he's great. Do I think he's interesting? Yeah. Is there somebody I want to have replace Beethoven? Not today, no.
How do you encourage, or how do you foster that? How do you teach somebody to have those sorts of ideas, or to follow those ideas through if they do have them? And rely on the tech.
I'm more interested, when I'm teaching, I'm more interested in following their ideas, to tell you the truth, because I'm whatever I am. I've had my life, I've had my career, and I still work my kind of stuff. But I have a lot of biases, and I have a lot of prejudices. If you tell me who's the greatest composer in the world, or ask me that, I'll give you a couple of names, but you may disagree, and that doesn't mean I'm right, or So I feel the same way about teaching. What I do with students, however, when it comes to things like samplers and the way they actually write, if I think that they can get to their solution or to a better solution quicker by another method, then it's my obligation to explore that other method. They may never give up their samplers. You can write good music on samplers, and you can. You can write good music on synths. Some guys have made really great careers on it. But if they're trying to find, if they look as though they're looking for something else, then my job as a teacher is to try and get them into that comfortably so that they can realize whoever they are, their inner musical life, which is the most important thing.
And there's a lot of writing bad tunes to get that stuff out, and then you can get on to writing better tunes, right? I mean, you kind of have to get them out of your head and work.
My belief is that most music stinks. I mean, if you made a list right now, if it were possible to make a list of all the music you knew and all the music you'd ever heard, and then which were your favorites would be this tiny little bit. It'd be like the cream at the top of this big bottle of milk. Most music sucks, but a lot of it is really good, and the stuff that's good is really good. I mean, it's really, really, really good. So the ceiling is very high, but the hole that's below it is very, 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 very deep. So what's good? It's funny when it comes down to what's good music, what's bad music. A guy I studied with years ago, it was typical in his remarks. He said, there's a lot of conversation about that. He said, I can tell you what the difference is between good music and bad music. Bad music is boring. And I've thought about that for 40 years or more, and I thought, yeah, that's basically it. I mean, the pieces that I listen to over and over and over and over again are not boring. The ones that I listen to that I can't get interested in, that's probably bad music. And that's probably true of all of us,
Wow, that's brilliant and
Yeah,
so
that
concise.
me too. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
It's a good way to think about performers too. I mean, once there's a technical facility, once you've done your homework there, it's like, yeah, the great performers are the ones who aren't boring, whether they do it like you would or a completely different interpretation. But
actually, that's a really major point. When I married my wife, as I say, she's a violinist. One of the things we found out, you're trying to figure out who the other person is and blah, 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 blah. So this is actually before we got married. But because she was a performer, she was really concerned about the performance, not so much about the piece of music. I'm a composer. I want to see how the piece is put together, how it's structured, blah, blah, blah. So I would listen to a recording. I said, this is a really good piece. She says, well, it sounds pretty scrappy. And I said, no, it's a really good piece. Listen to this thing. Listen to it. They're out of tune and listen, So after a long time of screaming and kicking, I started listening to performances. And exactly what you say is true, because you can have a great piece badly performed, which will be really, 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 really dull.
Right.
Or you can have a dull piece really well performed, which will make the piece sound better than it should.
Right.
So part of the thing that we have to do as musicians, for those of us who write the stuff, we want to try to encourage good performances, whatever that is. They don't necessarily come, by the way, from the composer. That's what you have conductors for. Like the reason I met Jens was I was in Manchester to hear the Royal Northern Brass Band play a piece of mine that had not done so well in the States. But the conductor was Bram Woltovi. Well, Bram's a good conductor. I mean, he does symphonies and he has a brass band background, so he knew what he was doing. This piece sounded great. I mean, it was highly successful, but a year before that, it had been a dismal failure, strictly because of performance.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. Do you, this is my ignorance shining through, which it always does.
Oh, goody. This is always my favorite part of the episode.
When you're writing for film, my impression, from what I understand, you often work maybe exclusively with orchestrators. Like you come up with the initial stuff and then you hand it off to an orchestrator. Is that the way that you have worked with the film side? You've orchestrated all your own stuff.
Yeah, but let me just explain. For the most part, composers in film have always worked with orchestrators. There are two reasons for that. One reason is because sometimes the composers didn't know how to orchestrate. But the more common reason is that they really didn't have time.
Oh.
The thing in the film business, or in television particularly, is that time is always of the essence. I mean, you're the last guy on the show to be working, other than the sound effects guy. And so you're struggling to get all the notes down. These days, it makes it even harder because with the computer stuff, you've got to do mock-ups, you have to do synth mock-ups, you've got to do show and tell, you've got to have people come in and get mucking around with your creative process. So there's really not a lot of time to orchestrate. However, I'm somewhat of a control freak, and I also never wanted somebody mucking around with my music, either to make it better or worse. If it was going to be really good, I wanted to be able to benefit from however that turned out. If it was really bad, then I wanted to be able to learn how to fix it and get better. So I devised for the movies a short score process, which I borrowed from looking at Jerry Goldsmith and to some extent John Williams, of writing all my music on 7 or 8 staves. And then I devised a kind of paper, and then I made it a little bit grander, so I have a few more staves, and I put it on 8 bars on a page so I could see the whole thing. And I'd write these little notes with all the voice leading, little arrows saying, this is oboe 1, this is oboe 2, this is the English horn. I mean, I have the system, all that kind of stuff. And then I would give that to an orchestrator.
I see.
The idea being that everything that needed to be done was on my page, just fill it out on the big page so the copyists don't go blind.
I see.
And then my copyist said to me, after several years of doing this, he says, we can just copy on your sketch. And I said, well, can you actually read it? He says, no. He says, you're very clear. He said, we'll just copy on your sketch. So I called up my orchestrator and said, well, it's been nice. I made a couple of people unhappy, but from that point on, I just wrote on this condensed score. But I have a neat hand, and I write very small, and I'm very specific. Since then, I've had to change that, and I've done a lot of scores on Sibelius. Like last year, I did a TV show with John Debney, Texas Rising. I did that I wrote that all into Sibelius. I mean, I just put up the score because there was no time to do anything else. I just jammed it onto the score. I recently did, a couple of weeks ago, I recorded an album with Seth MacFarlane. And I'd never done arrangements before. So again, I mean, I wrote them out in pencil, but I put them up on Sibelius for the score for the copyists to have, because I figured if there are going to be changes, it's easier to do it on a digital score rather than have me make holes in the paper, you know. So so now I do it sort of half and half. I do pencil, I do Sibelius. You know, if I have to do mock-ups, I do that as well. But no, but I've tried to be my own orchestrator, for better or for worse.
What I would guess, well, any of us have certain things in our lives we're working on, and there's some sort of favorite thing that is. What's your favorite thing that you're working on right now? I don't mean a piece, but what kind of thing is it? The teaching, or the writing, or the trips to hear your pieces, or I don't know if you conduct, or what is it that really gets you fired up right now?
I mean, I don't want to be stupid about this, but I enjoy teaching. The thing I think I enjoy the most is, well, writing is, I don't enjoy the act of writing, but I really like writing. I like getting out new pieces. And my frustration right now is I don't have enough time to really get out the pieces that I would like to get out. But, you know, I will. At the moment, I'm just beginning an indie film, which is going to take all my attention for the next month or so. So my focus will be on that. I'll be happy when that's over, because then I'll be able to go back to my own stuff, you know. And then in the fall, I'll start doing some teaching again. I actually, you know, the thing I like about being a composer is I like the fact that and the thing I like about the way my career has gone, the good parts of it, have been that I've had a chance to do a lot of different stuff. I mean, I've done movies, I've done television shows, I've done the video games. Lately, I've done arranging, I've done concert music, I've done chamber pieces, I've done orchestral pieces, blah, 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 blah. I like all that stuff. I like being a composer it's like a composer for hire, you know. Mm-hmm. But when I have the chance to do my own music, I like being able to try and figure out what I'm going to write and how I'm going to do it and all that stuff. I just like the entire process. So I can't give you a really great answer.
No, that is a really great answer.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's.
How far in advance? I mean, how far out are you booked right now?
Well, I've got this one movie job to do, and then I've got 2 commissions to do, but I'm trying to get some more. The commissions don't have to be done until next year, so I feel like I've got some time. It might get. There's a possible TV series coming up in the spring, which will compromise me. So. I don't know. I mean, I've never been booked that far out, to tell you the truth, because for whatever reason, I've never really known what I was going to do too far away. Mm-hmm. If I've got a movie that has to be done, I know when that has to be done, and that makes me very careful about how I time my days and the things I give up and the things I continue to do. But what I'm going to be doing in August, I couldn't tell you. You know, I'm hoping to take a vacation, but. No, I don't know. I know that I've got a couple of pieces that are due maybe in September next year. I'm sure I can get that done. Yeah.
And my impression of what I think I know about how the TV series things work is that becomes a very time-consuming thing. And for a while, you'd see music by Mike Post, and he would come up, I think, with a general sort of palette, as I understand it, and then he had a team of writers who kind of executed based on the rules that he had set forth. Is it that sort of experience for an ongoing TV series, or is that not what you're?
No, that's what a lot of guys do. If you see a guy who, you know, no names please, but if you see a guy who has 4 TV series, mm-hmm. I mean, he's farming it out.
Right.
That's the way you can do it. I mean, there are creepy ways of doing that, like taking all the guys. Credit. I mean, there's that part, not paying them decently, blah, blah, blah. There's all that, keeping them secret as ghostwriters. But there's also an upfront way of being able to do it, which I think Hans Zimmer does most often. Hans created this collaborative business where he openly works with, you know, several other people who together, now he's the guy in charge. I mean, like Hans is very good at figuring out, he's very good about movies, but he's very open about collaboration, and he's very open about giving other people credit. So I would say it depends. I mean, if you see a composer like John Williams, I would say the chances are probably about 100% that every note there came from John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Other guys, maybe 95% of the notes. I mean, I've had times myself where I couldn't get done and I needed help. So you hire guys, who can help you get done with those cues that you just can't finish. And I think most people have done that, but other people just, as a matter of business, work with other people, and they do it under their own supervision, and then they have different ways of business to be able to take care of it. It's hard to. It's look. I mean, even in the old days of CBS, when I worked for CBS, like the shows that we worked on were shows like all these shows, and a bunch of at the end.
Okay, so we just had, actually, when I say we, I mean Lance's computer just had a complete meltdown, and so Lance's computer was just wasting the time of like a famous composer. So Lance, on behalf of your computer, apologize to Bruce.
My computer's very sorry. I shouldn't have bought a K-Tel computer. I was assured that it's diesel powered. I mean, I thought certainly it shouldn't be that big of a problem.
Man, was he mad when he was on hold. He was throwing things around his office. He smashed a metronome.
I did say this is why I use a pencil.
Yes, he did say that. He said, with a pencil, this doesn't happen.
Actually, it's funny. Apropos of that, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine who used to work over at Paramount, she did a lot of music archiving. So she was trying to find the old scores of television and movies that Paramount had done. And she opened up a bin and she picked up a score that was printed, like a home computer, picked it up and all the notes fell off the page. Not to worry, she said, because there was a floppy disk included, which of course nobody can use, right? So can you imagine picking up a piece of, let's say, Bach or Handel and having the notes fall off the page? No, because they were done by pencil or by ink. But, the stuff that we've been doing the last 20, 25 years, we pick it up and it all falls to the ground because our printers aren't hot enough to be able to embed it, like a book.
Oh, my goodness.
So there's one of the downside. And when I think about all my music that is stuck in my computer, if I should drop dead now, if nobody knows password, I mean, the music is goodbye. It's gone.
Why don't you tell us on the podcast? It'll crowdsource it. There'll be like hundreds or thousands of people that know your password. What could possibly go wrong?
I just tried to print it before I get to that point.
They just found a bunch of. I live in Pittsburgh, and the Andy Warhol Museum is here, and all of his archives. I mean, there's just warehouses of stuff that he created, and they've recently found all these disk drives or floppy disks, but it was for some really specific computer that didn't catch on. Back in the day, there were all these competing forms, and so there was a stack of discs that there was no machine to play them on, and one of the archivists figured out what it was and then went and found one of the machines, and they found a couple of dozen, don't hold me to the exact number, but a whole bunch of artwork that Andy Warhol had created playing around with this new kind of computer art technology. And so there was art that no one had seen in decades. Wow. That they were able to uncover and bring to light.
It's definitely a consideration, the music of the future. So.
Huh. Right. So while Bruce and I were catching up while your computer was melting down, and since we go way back to the top of the hour, and I do want to ask him specifically about his tuba concerto and the process and how that came to be and all that, because it's one of my favorite pieces, as I said. But before that, he was talking about striping, which he said, "Do you know what that is?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, of course." I'm like, "I have no idea what striping is." And he just talked about how the recording of movie music has completely changed of late, and I thought it was fascinating. So, Bruce, can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, it used to be, and used to be means maybe 15 years ago, not that long ago. If you had a score to do with an orchestra, you would assemble an orchestra of 60, 70, 80, 110, whatever people, and you put it into a big room, and you'd record them all at once. They'd all play the music, you'd rehearse the music, you'd make your corrections, and everybody would be recorded at once. Now, what is more often the case is you do it through a process called striping in order to have complete control of the track. Now, complete control means for you, the composer, but it really means for you, the director, or you, the producer, or the studio, or the whoever it is, but probably the director. So what they do is they will have each instrumental section played by themselves. First violins, second violins, violas, cellos, basses. And then they'll go to the brass, and then they'll go to the woodwinds, and have each of these groups play by themselves, sometimes hiring them in units. So what you don't get is you don't get any sense of performance. Like when the violins are playing a line, they can't hear across the room to hear what the woodwinds are doing or what the brass is doing. So they're just playing the line. And when it's all put together, it's put together with all these people who have been playing with no reference of any other performance. And that becomes more and more what the scores are. It's not as much fun to play that kind of music because you don't get the thrill. I mean, as much thrill as there is in a lot of this music, you don't get the thrill of being able to interact and you know, change your performance. So the way movies are being done is very different. You figure that when I began, in the days I began, there was music there with sound effects. Well, now there's music. What is considered sound effects is more like sound design. And sound design gets to be pretty hairy because it's as complicated and maybe more complicated than a lot of the music tracks because these guys are creating sounds which often are in competition with whatever the music is. So you see a big movie which has maybe a huge score, 120 musicians, and very often you can't hear it because the sound design is so raucous. You know, the explosions and all that, and the battles of people knocking heads against buildings and superheroes and the end of the world and the cataclysm, you know, you just wonder what the heck they got the orchestra there for. I walked onto a dubbing stage one time years ago to see a director I'd worked with, and he was mixing his movie that he had just recorded with a really well-known composer. I mean, really well-known composer from years ago. And what he was in the process of doing was saying to the mixer, okay, let me hear the guitar. That's okay. Let me hear the horn. No, take that out. Okay, now let me hear the bass. No, take the bass out. Let me hear the strings. Okay, that's okay. Let me hear the, you know, it was like that. He was actually remixing the entire score.
Wow.
If the composer had known it, the composer would have gone berserk, you know, because he had written a score with the guitar there and the horns there and the bass there. Those were the notes he wanted to hear. Those were the notes that he thought were going to complement the movie, but the director had his own system of orchestration.
Wow.
So, I mean, there is that part to the movies as well. That probably does not happen to John Williams, but it happens to a lot of other people.
So with your teaching, what do you teach? Let's ask a simple question. Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, basically, as you mentioned at the top, I've been teaching at two schools. I teach at USC and at UCLA. At USC, I'm involved in the Scoring for Motion Picture and Television program. And so I do a class in orchestration. I mean, traditional orchestration, essentially how to orchestrate for the movies. So we go through all the instruments, all the orchestral instruments, and then I go through classical scores, I go through the history of orchestration, and then I focus a lot on motion picture orchestration. We go through scores like How to Train Your Dragon of John Powell, which I love, Alexander Desplat, Benjamin Button, which is completely different, which I also love, scores by Jerry Goldsmith, scores by me, scores by anybody I can get my hands on, frankly, to show how this stuff that we've been learning applies to this very, very specific medium. At UCLA, I'm involved mostly with just composition. I do get students who are interested in getting into film. I'm more interested actually in dealing with composition for composition. But I'm sort of the go-to guy if they've got a, well, there's two of us. Peter Golub is also there. Peter and I tend to handle a lot of the film music wannabes. So, and I enjoy them both. The universities aren't too crazy that I go back and forth between the two of them, but
you're Bruce Broughton.
No,
to do it.
Offer me a better deal.
Yeah, right. That's right. There is a number at which I will become exclusive, right?
No, I really enjoy it because they're very different, and I mean, and frankly, there's the old thing: if you ever want to learn anything, teach it. So I've learned more from this than any of them have. You know,
right?
Like there's nothing greater than getting a piece of music by a young composer and you're looking at it and you say, I have no idea what this is supposed to be. I don't have a clue as to why this person wants to be a musician, much less a composer. So you start from there. What does that note mean? Is that what he or she really meant to do? If so, how does it relate to the note before it and the bars before it? And it's that kind of stuff. So it's like a Sherlock Holmes game. You're trying with some people, and other people you can look at it and say, oh, I see. They were trying to do this, but didn't quite get there, or I think they're trying to do this. Or some people, like I have one student whose style is really beginning to evolve. I mean, he's coming up with really kind of new ideas and new ways of being able to do it. I find it really interesting. One former student sent me some stuff recently. I could hardly read the score. It was so advanced. I mean, he had just already taken off and gone somewhere else. I mean, I find that stuff really exciting. So,
what sort of career mentorship or advice do you share with your students? Or you could tackle it a different way. What do you hope that the students leave knowing in terms of how to navigate the waters of the industry that we're in?
Well, in the USC program, that's actually part of the course to some extent. I guess the one really simple thing is people ask, how do I get a movie to score? And the answer is really simple. Find somebody who will hire you. Now, having said that, how do you find somebody who's going to hire you? Well, I think this probably applies to players as much as it applies to composers. And whether you're in films or whether you're in whatever you're trying to do, you have to be around that group of people that you're trying to become a part of. So if you want to be into the film studio, if you want to do film work, and I don't necessarily suggest that that's a great thing to do with your life, but if that's what you want to do, you might consider going to a place where they make films, or where they record films, like Hollywood or New York or London or Bratislava, increasingly. I mean, someplace like that. If you're going to be in I don't know, Louisiana, and they're not making films in Louisiana, and they're not recording films in Louisiana, well, chances are you're not going to find a job real soon, And the same thing with composers. A lot of young composers try to attach themselves to working composers as interns or as assistants. This sometimes is a really, really smart way to go because you can earn while you learn. You hope that you can get money from it. I mean, that's essentially what I did when I got out of school and became an assistant in the music department at CBS. I was an assistant, and I was just learning everything. I mean, I was like a sponge. I was just picking up everything. So I learned a lot. But if you want to become a composer and you decide to get in by being a copyist, well, that's a little around the corner, because being a copyist is a fine job and you can certainly make money at it. But if you become a successful copyist, you're going to get more copying. You're not going to get composing. And the same thing, if you're a trumpet player, do you want to start off by arranging trumpet charts? Well, that'll get you trumpet players, but it's not going to get you in as a trumpet player. Mm-hmm. Sort of like that. So I don't have any hard rules about how to get in. I mean, I think you can talk to anybody and find different answers from whoever you talk to. But basically, I think you need to have access. So, and having said that, before you give up your life to Los Angeles, you better know the difference between what you're leaving and what you're going to, because Los Angeles or New York or London is a very, 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 very big city, and it has certain ways that it works and certain ways that it doesn't work, and there's a certain comfort zone and a certain discomfort zone, and you have to be aware of that too, particularly if you have a family and you're trying to be responsible, So it's not a real easy question. I think you could, for the guys that you've interviewed, if you ask that question to all of them, somewhere along the line, they would probably talk about access. They tried an audition, or they met somebody, or they wrote a letter to somebody, or they went to a concert and they talked to somebody after that kind of stuff. Some of his personality too. You have to be social. You have to be able to meet people. I'm not particularly great at it, I'll admit. But sometimes I have to actually meet people. Sometimes I have to say, I'm Bruce, Who? Bruce, and I did Silverado, huh? Which actually more is the case. Like my wife, when we got married, she had two little boys, 9 and 7, and they were both born in London, so they didn't know an awful lot about the States. So they knew that I was a composer. And they said, well, what are some of the things you did? And I said, well, like I worked on Gunsmoke. And they just looked at me. I said, Gunsmoke, Marshall Dillon? No. Dodge, no. And I realized, oh yeah, these are two little English kids. What do they know about Gunsmoke? It's like 40 years ago. I find that over and over and over again. I talk to young students, and they go, "I'm sorry, I don't know what that is."
Oh man!
So then you feel like a real dork, Well, I also write band music and all that.
Yeah, that's not as cool as Gunsmoke, but only if you know what Gunsmoke is.
They only know what it is. And then I've had people say, "God, you worked on the first season of Gunsmoke." I go, No, I worked on the last season, and it was 2 years long.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm 133 years old. That's right.
Yeah, how old do you think I am? So, before we run out of time, I think tuba players will be mad at me if I don't ask you about this, because can you talk to us about how the tuba concerto came about, and then maybe any interesting tidbits in terms of how it unfolded?
Yeah, it's actually a nice story. It was written for Tommy Johnson, who was at that time probably the busiest tuba player in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He used to say that he was the most recorded tuba player in the world, which is probably true.
I bet
He's
it is.
the guy best known for Jaws and for not Close Encounters, but although he did work on it. A lot of stuff that John Williams did, if there's a tuba solo in it, chances are it's Tommy. But Tommy was my neighbor, and Tommy lived about 3 blocks away, and he had lots of students. It's funny, a lot of guys who now are playing principal in symphonies, like Gene Picorni in Chicago, Norm
Pearson.
Norm Pearson here in Los Angeles. I mean, I didn't know Gene, but Norm I used to accompany as a kid. When he was taking lessons from Tommy. So whenever Tommy went out and played, he would ask me if I would accompany him. So we did a lot of work together. The thing I learned very quickly was, in those pieces that have a tuba and a piano, the tuba's got all the good parts. The piano parts suck, because they're usually written by tuba players or by somebody who doesn't know anything about the piano. So it's bad enough you have to play the Carnival of Venice, bump, 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 that's bad enough. But then you have to play these Alec Wilder things that are just kind of funky on the piano. So the thing about Tommy is he liked to play things that were fun. He liked to grab an audience. He liked to have a good time. So we did one concert at a school. He was playing in a brass quintet, and the shtick in that was that after they did their quintet, all 5 of the members were going to get up and play something they liked. So and everybody was playing in their shirt sleeves and their jeans, and they're playing pieces which were just, they weren't heavyweight pieces. They were just kind of fun pieces. So I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a piece for Tommy and me to play, something that Tommy can enjoy, something that I can enjoy, and something that an audience can enjoy. So that's what I did. I wrote the tuba concerto. I wasn't dumbing down. I was really trying to write a piece directly for people, for the players as well as for the audience. And fortunately, it just went off really well. It gets played all the time. I've always been happy to have it, but I think one of the reasons it's such a friendly piece is because it was really written for a good friend. I mean, Tommy was an incredible guy. The people who knew him, they talk about him all the time. He was just a great human being,
Yeah.
So it's a piece that I always liked, and I always have a nice feeling about. It exists in 3 versions. It exists as a sonata, which is the version with piano. The reason it's called a concerto is because sonata seemed to be a dopey name for a piece that had a big instrumental background. I made one big mistake on it. When I arranged it for the winds, I decided to do it for orchestral winds, sort of like the way Stravinsky did the piano concerto, where it was all winds and just basses. That way I figured either a band can play it or an orchestra can play it. What I learned many, many, many years later, after an orchestra didn't play it, was that because it had triple winds, it was too expensive for an orchestra to program unless they programmed Mahler. And they're not going to play this piece in Mahler. So I did another arrangement for orchestra, for standard orchestra. So it has 3 different versions. And they're all, I like them all. I think they all work.
I played... I was just going to say that I met Tommy a number of years ago when we went to, I think it was before Lance was in the group, I think, at UCLA, and he played with us the it was like a brass ensemble, and I spent the day with him, and about 20 minutes in, I felt like I'd known him for years. He was just such a an old soul. Yeah, it was he was a special guy and just a phenomenal player. My goodness.
No, he was spectacular. So I'm always happy to see the front page of that thing because it has his name at the top of it.
Yep. Yeah, good.
Are there brass pieces that you wish got more play, that you feel like, this was a really good piece? We have, largely brass players listening to this. What do you wish brass players were playing more often?
Yeah, like my latest tuba piece, Turbulence. I'd like, that's starting to get on. I think Gene played it at the tuba thing the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I have a piece for euphonium and band called Tent Meeting Revival with Hallelujah Windup. This from my background. It's not a parody. It's actually a nice piece. UCLA played it recently. I have 3 brass quintets. One actually I wrote for Jens Lindemann and his guys, called When a Body Meets a Body, which is a lot of fun. And then the 2 other quintets, I have a brass ensemble piece, which is just now starting to get played, called Fanfares, Marches, Hymns, and Finale. That's for orchestral brass and percussion. It's also been arranged for brass band, so that version is available. What else do I have? I've got a bunch of pieces I've got a horn sonata. I have several pieces for trumpet. The most popular trumpet piece is probably a little piece called Oliver's Birthday, which is for trumpet and piano. That gets played fairly often. Oliver is my stepson. I talked before about Excursions, which is for trumpet and band. I have lots of pieces for horn. I have the sonata. I have a piece for 5 horns and tuba. I wrote a piece for the Hollywood Bowl last year for 16 horns, a fanfare for 16 horns. Wow. I have a piece for 8 horns. A lot of this stuff can be found on my website. We can put in a promo on brucebroughton.com. I'm revising my website, but there's a list there of the concert works. And if you can just go through it and find out, what you're interested in, there's a ton of works and the publishers, which unfortunately there are too many publishers, but I'm trying to publish most of the things myself. A lot of these things you can just get through me. Okay. Or if you just wrote me a note at info@brucebroughton.com, I could give you a lead on how to find the piece.
And we will put both your website and also that email address will be in the show notes so that you can find him there. And you just segued perfectly. You mentioned our dear friend Jens Lindemann, and you talked about the piece When a Body Meets a Body, which reminded me of When a Body Meets a Problem, which, of course, we are talking about Jens and his very tragic bout of chop problems of late. And so was wondering if you could help Jens with his body problem, maybe with any advice that you might have for Jens in these very difficult times.
I think that it's a very simple solution. I think if Jens focused more on his technique and less on what kind of a jacket he was going to wear.
I do know Jens.
Yeah, he does know Jens. Oh, that's spectacular. It's also spectacular that he's wearing a pink shirt as he says this. That's fantastic. That's awesome. Less worrying about the jacket, more worrying about technique. Oh, that was even better than I thought it was going to be, and I thought it was going to be good. So, there you go. So brucebroughton.com, as we just said, and by the time we don't do interviews over the summer, so by the time this comes out, your website might even be done because it's going to be in a couple of months. So,
okay.
Yep. So check into that, and you can find all the pieces, and even just check on the bio, and click on the bio rather, and you can see some of the films he's done, and then you can go watch them and re-listen. There's a bunch of movies that you have already seen for sure, and it's always fascinating to me. When a great film composer like yourself does your job as well as you do, then I don't tend to focus, certainly the first time. I don't focus on anything. You just experience the movie, but it's always fascinating to me to go back and then to really focus on the music in a spot, and it's you realize just how much it brings to the table when it's done right, which you do.
Apropos of that, a lot of these things are now on CD, and the record company that has done most of my CDs is Intrada, Intrada. If you're interested in getting the actual soundtracks to things like Silverado or Tombstone, pieces like that, I should go to Intrada.com.
Okay.
And if they don't have it, if it's out of press, you can probably find it on eBay or something like that. Except you'll probably pay a stupid price for it. But because Intrada really has a lot of my stuff.
Great. Well, we will we'll link to that as well. So, good. Lance, am I forgetting anything?
No, just thank you. This has been really a great treat to get to talk to you for a bit.
Well, you guys have been great.
Yeah.
This is a lot of fun. Been really a lot of fun.
So
thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course. No, it really is our pleasure. When Bruce works with Julia and Jennifer at iCadenza artists, and they emailed us saying like, hey, Bruce is a client, and would it be, might he be a fit for your podcast? I remember Lance replied, and he was like, are you kidding me? Of course, it'd be incredible to get to interview him. So they were like asking us as if like, well, could you do us, could you do Bruce a favor? And, they were wording it exactly how you should in terms of a business email. But then we were like, well, yeah, that's an easy quote unquote favor that we can do for Bruce in quotes. Yeah. It's like, no, it's been great.
See, they asked me too.
Yeah.
You want to talk to a bunch of guys on a brass podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we did think you lost a bet. So, yeah, the worst that can happen is an hour lost of your life and some emotional scarring. But hopefully it's been okay. And the good news is, well, the bad news, I guess, is it's still so early out there in LA that if it really was traumatizing, then we've ruined an entire Saturday for you. So yeah, it's like if it's an evening guest, they can just sleep on it and make it go away. But you got a whole day ahead of you. So.
Well, whenever this shows up, tomorrow's Father's Day, so I'll get it all back.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Good.
Happy Father's Day.
Yeah, happy Father's Day,
Andrew.
Which we're now.
September when that shows up.
Yeah, exactly. That's almost exactly. I think it's going to be in September, so we'll just all celebrate Father's Day again. So, all right, Bruce. This has really been a treat for us, and Lance, it's just such an inspiration to get to talk to you. Yeah. Always. It's great. Yeah, maybe we should go into business someday or something. So, all right, that does it for another episode of the Brass Junkies.
You've been listening to the Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to help support the podcast in order to make more episodes like this one possible, please visit pedalnotemedia.com/donate for more details. Also, be sure to check out our latest recording, The Brass Recording Project, at brassrecordingproject.com. The Brass Junkies is produced by Austin Boyer and Buddy Deschler of the Fredericksburg Brass Institute. Executive producers are Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.